Good morning, afternoon, everyone. Now, imagine a workplace where digital tools enhance our productivity without overpowering our peace of mind, where notifications and emails no longer dictate our workflow but optimize us. It's not a distant dream, but it's a tangible future that awaits us. So, today's panel discussion is on navigating digital overload, effective strategies for managing technology in the workplace. So if we could bring the panelists forward. And good morning, evening to the panelists. Now, if we want to go around the virtual room and do some introductions and just highlight why you'd like what you want to share today in the panel. So we'll start with you, Tracy.
Great, thank you. Looking forward to it, Rod. And I know it's 2 o'clock in the morning for you. So
yeah, nice and early.
Nice to have a conversation globally. So I'm Tracy Brower. I am a PhD in sociology, and I study work-life fulfillment and happiness at work. I've been in this HR space for a couple of decades, and I'm the vice president of workplace insights for Steelcase. I write for Forbes and Fast Company, and my newest book is called The Secrets to Happiness at Work. And I think this challenge of digital overload is one of the biggest risk factors for our well-being, for our sanity, for our emotional well-being, our physical well-being, and our mental well-being, and for our happiness in work and in life. So looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Tracy. Maybe we'll go to Ashley next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Fernandez. I am the CEO of Ashley Murray Coaching, and I am a professional development, career, and leadership workplace expert. And I am pumped to talk about this conversation today because it is so easy to have everything that we experience in the digital space infiltrate all aspects of life, whether it's work or at home. So I'm thrilled to be able to share the stage with you all today.
Thank you, Ashley.
Thanks.
And last. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Václav. I'm from the Czech Republic, but I'm currently living in Southeast Asia. So for me, it's almost midnight now. But I'm very happy to join this panel because I have a master's degree in psychology, but have been in the human resource space for the past almost 25 years. And technology is very close to my heart. Actually, before I studied psychology, I wanted to go into IT and become a programmer myself. And I still maintain this as a hobby. And last year, I published a book on HR digital transformation. So this topic is highly interesting for me, and I hope I had something interesting to share with you as well.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So maybe just start nice and easy. And I was just wondering, what is digital overload? Like, let's maybe just define the topic a little bit, a bit further than we have so far. We'd like to start with that.
I can jump in.
Thank you.
I think, digital overload is, I think, really this challenge that we have where there's so much ubiquity of the digital experience in all parts of our life. And some of that we can control and some of it we can't. And even the things that we can officially control can be really difficult, right? So digital overload is about not being able to turn off, even if you want to, because there's an addictive quality to it. Digital overload is kind of the ability to be connected 24/7. Digital overload is the expectation that we're more connected and more immediate in every response in every realm. Digital overload is the fact that digital happens sort of constantly, and it replaces the other kinds of things that we might be doing, like being in real life with other people, being out in nature, taking time away from screens. So I think there are lots of different ways for us to think about digital overload. And I think the other thing that's relevant to say is there's lots of great things about digital. There's lots of great things about media, social media, connections. And so it's really a matter of degree and a matter of how we manage and control it for ourselves. So I know we'll get into more of that.
We will. Thanks, Tracy. Anyone want to add to that one?
I think you did a great job describing, Tracy.
Yes,
I think that we often don't even realize how infiltrated it is in different aspects of life, right? Like even think if you go to pick up takeout or a restaurant, like digital is just the way. And so it's understanding kind of the nuance of adapting to what is and how we can use it to our benefit while also not letting it completely control all the things, which is the tricky part.
It is very tricky. Thanks.
I think it's quite interesting you mentioned the addictive element of it, because I think this is very true. If you imagine some 30 years ago, when you were waiting for a bus or for a train, right? You were just sitting there or standing and doing nothing. And nowadays you see all the people are holding their digital devices in their hands and they're scrolling through Facebook and I don't know what, TikTok and news and there's sort of like constant need of, you know, being fed with some kind of information, right? So I think it's maybe this addictive nature of the information that is actually causing this overload. It's not that we are constantly bombarded by information we don't need or we don't want, but if there's no demand for it, no one would ever produce the content or the information, right? So it's actually the addictive nature that is causing the overload, I think.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting point that like we're bombarded, but we're also consuming, and so we're driving some of the bombardment. It's actually really interesting to me, and I love your point, Ashley, as well, about how it's just so ubiquitous in society. I had a situation recently where I was traveling on business and my SIM card died in my phone. And I was like, how am I going to get home? Like I know I can look at actual monitors in an actual airport, but if I don't make my connection, I'm not going to make it home. And if I don't get to the airport and I need my GPS to get there. And, there's so many things that some of it we can control, like, no, I really need to stay off social media today, for example. But then there are other things where it's like, I don't even control how much digital drives my ability to just live my life in a really, really ordinary way. And I think that's one of the things that creates the overload is it's not just our own choices anymore. It's like feeling that level of dependency. If we need to do something in the old fashioned way, it's not always possible anymore.
Some really good insights there, and some good insights, and it makes me reflect that probably about 30 years ago, picking up on that point, on a train's how I met my wife. I don't know if I would have met her if we had mobile phones then. I think 30 years ago, I remember we used to talk on such things. So these days, it's you certainly see people engaged with what's on their phones or got their headphones in, etc., etc. So it has changed a lot. So maybe just extending the topic a little bit, I'm just wondering about then defining digital load versus effective digital use. So what distinguishes sort of empowering digital use versus overwhelming load? So what would be some more examples of that?
So I can jump in. I think understanding how to be able to use digital to your advantage in the workplace, right, and in life, versus sometimes it's dictating what you're doing, right, for a lack of a better word. So if we think about the way everyone communicates, it's via email, it's via text, it's via MS Teams chat, it's via Zoom, right? It's via all these things versus the more antiquated way, which is doing things in person and having actual conversations and meeting people for coffee and having actual business meetings, together. But I think there's a balance in between doing things effectively and seeing how it can work for you, right? Like almost testing out and trying, right? Not assuming that there's a one size fits all, like because you use this app, I'm going to use this app and it's going to be great, right? Even if you think of something as simple as calendar management, which integrates both, right? Work, life, all the things. It's like, okay, are you using Apple Calendar or using Google Calendar? Are you using a different calendar app? Are you using a paper calendar or using all the, right? Like, what are we doing? And understanding, I think, the nuance. Sometimes we try to push something because we feel like we should do that, right? Like we should use some sort of centralized calendar app, or we should not have a paper one, or whatever the case may be. And I think it's really critical for people to understand, try different things out, right? See what's working for you and how it can actually help benefit you and increase whatever it is that you're trying to achieve versus detract. Because sometimes we spend time trying to learn something new or make something work, and it's like, this just isn't working, right? And that's okay too.
Thanks, Ashley. And I like the calendar example, because in my household, half the household use iPhones, the other half use Google Pixels, and we accidentally, we've got family calendars, and they get mixed up, and we get in trouble, or I get in trouble for being at the wrong place at the wrong time. So yes.
That's actually a great segue. I think like one of the differentiators for me between digital overload, kind of not so good, and using digital positively is all about if it's connecting us or disconnecting us. Like I always think sometimes of like social media as empty calories. I've got how many thousands of LinkedIn connections? I've got how many hundreds of Facebook connections? But are those people that I would know if I ran into them? Are they people that I can, call if I really, really, really need help? Are they people who are relying on me, etc.? So sometimes we feel connected and it's actually kind of empty calories because we're not necessarily getting nutrients from those connections. We're not feeling nourished from those connections. So when digital helps connect us, I think it's really, really great, right? Like we connect on a platform like this across the globe. We do text parenting where we're, checking in with our kids in a really appropriate way, not a helicopter way, but we're checking in and letting them know we're thinking about them. So I think when it connects us instead of disconnects us, it's a big deal. And I think when it provides us with information, right? Like you're at dinner with your family and a question comes up and you're like, hey, let's find that out. And then you put the phone down again and then actually talk to each other, right? Like I think when it provides us with information that catalyzes our continued conversations, that's a big deal. I think it can also be helpful to create efficiency. So we get things done more easily that we have to do, and then we have more time to do what we want to do. And I think finally it can be actually really helpful when it helps us get away or facilitates things that we that bring life for us or that are empowering or part of our well-being. So, like I use my Map My Walk app because I love to go out on walks, or I use Audible because I love to listen to my Audible when I'm on my walks. So that's all digital, but it's feeding something that is good for my well-being versus detracting from my well-being. So I think that's one of the ways that we can think about it is it enhancing or detracting in those few areas of connection and well-being and efficiencies and the choices that we get to make.
Some really great points there, Tracy. And you reminded me when my background, I was in the Air Force, and very early in my career, well before mobile phones, I was in my office and my boss came into the office and the phone rang. So I was in a conversation with my boss. The phone rang and I actually picked it up and started talking. As soon as I put that down, I was soon told the right way to operate in such a, you don't pick up your phone. So I sort of try to apply that, but it's very difficult with the old mobile phone these days. But that was a very good lesson for me anyway, back in the non-digital times. Any more on this point? Will we move on?
I love your point, Rod. I remember I had a boss who used to say, you have to figure out the difference between important and urgent. Like the phone is ringing, that's urgent, right? Like you want to pick it up to make it stop ringing. but it may not actually be important. And I think that's one of the challenges with digital. It's like always there and always on, and there's a ping and a ding and I better look. But it may not be really important stuff in our lives, right? So I think that lesson that I learned from a boss about a telephone in the olden days, right, is still apt today as we think about that digital.
I think it is. Thank you, Tracy.
I think
So I
that's
wonder
a
if just
great
sorry, go
point
on.
you've just raised. Sorry, you've just raised that with all these advancements in technology and new apps and new things coming up, there's certain rules that sort of start to, perpetuate in the society. And they're not written anywhere, and they're dynamic. They evolve as the technology evolves, and it's very important to navigate through this in order to be able to communicate effectively. As you say, it's before the phone was ringing, could be anything, right? Could be an emergency, or could be just a friend wanted to talk, whatever. Nowadays, you have to distinguish. It's an email. Maybe I have some time to react. It's a message on WhatsApp or Messenger or whatever. Maybe I should react within 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It's a phone call. Somebody is actually using the old-fashioned phone call. Okay, probably it's urgent. I have to pick it up. Or it's a scammer, right?
Yeah.
But I want to mention another aspect that I think is driving this digital overload, and it's also like a part of the addiction, right? You mentioned, and that's I think the way the social media started, if I'm not mistaken, was that idea to sort of keep the former classmates in touch, right? In such a way, because people spread and they go different cities and different jobs and different industries, but you still want to keep the connection because it's valuable, and that's how it started. But it evolved into something totally different. And I think one element of the social media is that it actually allows everyone to become sort of a mini celebrity within their social environment, right? Imagine before you could read the magazine or the news, and you would probably read about actors and politicians and other important people about what happened in their lives, in their private lives, what they had for dinner or whatever not. Nowadays, everyone can become a mini celebrity because you have your social network on the social media. And you can post, oh, look, I just cooked a beautiful dish, or look what we did just now with the family, we had a great pastime right now. And it sort of creates this like world of mini celebrities surrounded by other people. And that's one of the psychological elements that actually draws people to the social media.
That's really interesting. I'd never thought of that at all in that particular way, but that's really fascinating. But I think you make some great points around, like for me, I actually still connected to people that I was in primary schools, and that enabled me to go back to when I was a 10-year-old to connect with people. And I live in a different state in Australia today. Some really good points there. So I wonder then, if we just move on, I'm just wondering, what are some of the negative impacts of digital overload? So what are some of the, whether it's psychological, organizational repercussions, what are some of the negatives of it?
I can jump in. I
Thanks,
think
Ashley.
if I had to summarize, you're welcome. If I had to summarize in kind of like 3 key points, I think it's one, always on, right? You're always on, you're always available, quote unquote. Someone can always reach you. I think 2, that feeds into, especially when I think about the workplace and underrepresented talent in the workplace, not really being comfortable, or even just people who are newer in the workforce, right? Like not really understanding when something is urgent / important, right? To tie back to our point earlier, versus something that can wait. Because in this digital space, it's like, well, they sent me an email, I should respond, right? They sent me a chat, I have to respond right away. Like everything is right away. And I think that distinction is challenging and difficult for some people to navigate. And also, if we think about how digital is right now, like pre-COVID, before the world was working in a hybrid, mostly digital environment, right? You would go out for lunch. Maybe you go out with a team. Maybe you'd, go get a coffee, have a 15-minute coffee, whatever it was that you were doing. You didn't really think about, I'm stepping away. Whereas now I feel like the connotation is like, you should be there and be available all the time, and understanding how that drives into company culture and team management and leadership styles, I think is really a tricky and challenging point for people right now in a negative way.
They are all awesome points, Ashley. And like going back to my little point around the telephone call, I'm one who's not always on, but does that mean I'm working or I'm not working? And there's certainly different expectations go with that. So that was, that resonated with me. Some more points.
Yeah, it's a great point. It shifts our expectations toward each other. And I love the point that we were making earlier, that some of our social norms need to change and evolve, right? Like there's really interesting research that if your device is even present, even if you're not looking at it, even if it's present visually when you're having coffee or having lunch or whatever, it can distract you from your, IRL, your in real life conversation. And I think a couple of the other things that it has done in terms of our present reality is it's kind of rewired our brain. There's some really amazing research by Nicholas Carr that talks about how we've rewired ourselves to be fast, furious, superficial, and we're just not wired as much anymore for deep thinking, for deep focus. And that's where we get new ideas. That's where we are able to reflect. That's where we're able to, really think about our own thinking in order to develop ourselves. So I think we are trading off some of our ability to focus and do deep thinking. Another thing that I think we're losing is social skills, right? Like we're just not in person anymore. So literally we can't read each other as well anymore. We're maybe not as good at responding. We're maybe not as good at empathizing. I'm not saying this about every single person every single day, but as a society, those are some of the things that are challenging for us, is that when we aren't in real life together as much anymore, we're not as good at it anymore. And we see a lot of things like loneliness and depression and anxiety. And the younger generations, Gen Z in particular, has seen an enormous rise in this. And it is absolutely at the same, if you look at the data, it's the same point that social media was introduced when this rise in depression, anxiety, loneliness came about. And so those are, I think, some of the things that we are struggling with. I think the other thing that we struggle with as a result of digital overload and social media is we're kind of losing the ability to disagree and have healthy debates and constructive dialogues, because everything's narrowed down to a short number of characters, and there's anonymity in terms of how we come back at people. And so we may not be as good at having a deeper dive conversation, addressing nuances, being able to disagree in a way that moves the discussion forward in a constructive way versus just kind of sparring or maybe being a little snarky because we lack a sense of responsibility and obligation because we're kind of behind a screen a long ways away. Again, this may not be true for everybody, but as a society, we're seeing some of these bigger trends. So those are three places that I think we struggle and that we're going to need to kind of figure a new way through as we move forward.
Some really great points again, Tracy, and I can relate to the one about the young people. I've got a 12, 14, and 16-year-old, and in Melbourne, Australia, where I am, we had almost like 2 years of lockdown, and that was in their early years of being in high school, and I can just see the difference between them as we're now obviously out of lockdown and been here for a couple of years, but it has had an impact. And the point about the conversation, I think that's really an area where that impact, I see it anyway, with my own kids, and I just wonder these days, like a lot of times, you see them using ChatGPT to respond to each other, and how are they actually going to apply that in their real life? It's there's the good and bad of that as well, isn't there? Any more?
Yeah, it was amazing. I was responding to somebody on LinkedIn. They had sent me a note about an article I'd written, and so I was just starting to respond. and it
Mhm.
must be brand new. I don't know, or maybe I'm just late to the party, but there was an option for me to write a response using AI. And I just
Yes.
thought, oh, that's just heartbreaking. Like the day that I can't get back to somebody and say, hey, thanks for reaching out. Here are my thoughts. And then they're using AI and I'm using AI. So are we really even talking to each other? Right? It's like
Mm.
we're elevating efficiency over real human connection. So sorry, I know you were going to jump in, Eckler.
Can I just add one quick point on that, if you may?
Yes.
So I think that's a key piece, right? Not letting AI basically take over, so it's driving the conversation on both ends. But if we think about it from an equity standpoint, for people who maybe English is not their first language, it is a real opportunity, especially in the workplace, for individuals to help start to develop those skills. It's not all bad, but I think there's a fine line right between the two.
And just to add to this, I don't think that this is completely wrong, because a lot of the human communication is actually formal, right? It's not, many times we communicate not to actually convey any sensible meaning to the other person, but because it's expected, or because it's the norm, or because we want to be seen as polite or whatever not. So like all this birthday, congratulations, working anniversary, yeah, the AI is actually doing a very good job in that. It's helping it to automate. And to be honest, I know that many of these messages I'm getting are actually written by AI, or whatever is being automated, but it still feels good because someone had to press the button and send the message, right? Although it was written by AI, he wanted to do the step. So I think that's okay. But I think the biggest problem with the digital overall is actually that we are still struggling as humans to learn how to process all that information that is constantly bombarding our senses. Right? And we need to be able to find a way how to distinguish what is correct, what is wrong, what is just noise, and what is an outright manipulation and is misinformation that is intended to confuse us, right? So I think that's the biggest task we have to solve in order to be able to navigate through this successfully.
Okay, excellent. So, so we've sort of talked about what digital overload is and some of the consequences of it. I'm just wondering, what sort of practical methods can employees adopt to manage it effectively? So, what are some of our strategies we want to talk about? Am I coming across? Did you hear
I
the
can jump
question?
in. Yeah, I can jump in.
Sorry.
So I think in terms of effective, I'm sorry, just to reiterate, your question was around effective strategies for employees to be able to
Yeah,
navigate.
strategies to help manage the work. Yes, yeah.
So I think, I mean, again, right, I think it goes a little bit back to trial and error, kind of testing out, right, what works for you. But a few quick and easy things that you can do, which would depend on your culture and your organization, but is blocking or designating like time for deep thinking. So Tracy, to your point earlier, right, it's like we don't really have time to take a step back and actually think strategically about whatever it is that we're trying to achieve, whether it's a project or something we're working on, or even something like goal setting for performance evaluations, right? Because we're on a go, we're meeting, and then the day's over and you're like, oh, I have all this work to do, but you don't actually have time to stop to think about it. So I think being really intentional with calendar integrity for yourself, understanding, yes, it might have to flex, but can you build in some times where you don't take meetings, or you have time to research, to learn, to take a course, to read something. You have time to stop and just like sit and think about what it is that you're doing in the workplace, I think is important and fairly easy for people to implement, understanding there's flexibility there. One, I think two, being able to leverage different mindfulness activities for yourself. So understanding meditation is not for everyone, right? Breathing exercises, might make you uncomfortable, whatever it might be, right? But understanding how can you actually just take a step away, fully step away from the screen, even if it's for 5 minutes. Like everyone has 5 minutes. And if you don't, then that's a different problem. We need to talk about where you're working, but everyone has 5 minutes, right? And so can you take that 5 minutes and stretch, go outside, get some sunlight, take a walk, maybe call a friend, right? Catch up with someone, just do something that is breaking the constant of being on the computer and in the conversation and in the digital space. I think those two things are fairly easy for people to do themselves. And then the last piece I would say is voice your concern, right? If you're having challenges, no one's going to know. Your manager, your leaders, they can't read your minds. So you need to be able to be confident to share with your teammates, with your leaders, or yourself if you're a leader, with your teams, vice versa, right? On either what you're doing that's working well, or maybe you're just feeling overwhelmed too, right? And have an actual conversation about it, because we're all humans, right? We're all humans working with humans, and sometimes that gets away. And so the more we can ground things in the workplace in that aspect, I think will be really helpful. Yes, I'm sorry. And someone just made a comment that's so good, I have to say. So it says stepping away does not mean working on the way to the bathroom and have someone waiting for you as soon as you get back. Exactly. Like literally just step away. Even if it's a few minutes and you're putting it in your calendar, like just go do that. Even if it's to just get up and walk around your house, like do that.
Yeah, I think the key word in your question,
great point.
Rod.
Mindfulness, take time. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Sorry.
You go, Tracy.
Yeah, I feel like the key word in your question was employee, right? Like, what are we doing in the workplace? What are we doing in the work environment to really create better experiences for people? And I really think an important one, and you pointed to this earlier, Ashley, as well, is kind of the cultural permission, right? To be able to turn off. If we've got cultures where we can never turn off and we have to, be back to somebody within, minutes, no matter what time of day or whether it's the weekend, that creates real challenges. So I think culturally, for us to have leaders who model that ability to turn off, for us to be transparent with each other about when we're available and when we're not, with appropriate levels of privacy, right? Those kinds of things can help reinforce a culture. I know a few companies who have their meetings start at 5 after the hour and then finish up at 5 of the hour, just so they've got a minute or two between meetings, right? For those overwhelming days where you're back to back. We used to have a concept in IT called defrag. They would come and defrag your hard drive because there was all openings and spaces between the data. And I think about that with calendars too. How do you defrag your calendar so that you have blocks of time where you can think deeply? You mentioned that, Ashley, but that really goes a long way. Another thing I think is helpful is to actually use technology to manage technology. So, there are apps that can help us set limits. There is data we can present ourselves with that says, hey, this is how much time you've spent. There's some wonderful ways that you can have a timer go off and it says, hey, Tracy, you've been online for 15 minutes. Do you want to take more time or do you want to, do something else? And you're setting those for yourself. So you're not losing your day, but I think you're regaining your day and regaining your time. And then I think also there's always this braiding of the digital and the social. And so when we have team norms that allow us to really connect with each other. So maybe we're on a digital call together because we're global, but my gosh, we're going to carve out 4 minutes at the beginning of the call to just, talk to each other and say, hey, how's your day? And even though that may not be, getting right down to task, it still is important in building relationships, which make us better at our task anyway. So those team norms about transparency, those team norms about when we get back to each other and how fast, those team norms about priorities, those team norms about how we connect. I think that human digital interface is also a really important way that we empower people and help them to set boundaries that are appropriate.
Some lots of great points there, Tracy, and I like the idea of in particular in this virtual world, starting a meeting and, just chatting a bit, because I guess talking back in the physical world, I think Ashley mentioned before, like you go and have a coffee, go and have lunch together. Well, when we're virtual, it's very different. That's a good practical way. Any more to add on this point?
I wanted to say that it becomes even more complex when you work in international organizations that are spread across the globe, and people are working in different time zones. And then, they might be sending you messages or emails or be expecting you to communicate in times where you used to sleep. So I think it's nowadays it's a responsibility of every organization and every top management on every organization to set the boundaries in that sense. In some way, I mean, it's not probably feasible to give exact timings, like if you receive an email and you have X number of minutes to reply or whatever not, but to come up with some sort of sensible policies and expectations, what the employees are actually supposed to do in that sense. We had even a policy for social media in my previous company, because it happened that all this private life and professional life sort of one blends into another, and everything becomes fussy, and I think it's completely appropriate for companies to demand from employees that they refrain from certain comments on social media if they are in a relationship, an employment relationship with the company. They should be loyal, right? And certain things are simply not to be communicated. So we had to do that because there were some, instances of people posting things and internal information that was not supposed to go public. And of course, if you are in a publicly listed company, that might become a problem, right?
I think, sorry, can I just add one point? So being someone who's worked in a few different global teams and global environments, I can fully resonate with things coming at all hours and in all ways. And the urgency or feel, right, like the need to respond, which is like an internal thing people need to work on, but also the kind of tone at the top, right? What's expected. And something that I've seen that's actually worked really well is literally just a line at the bottom of someone's email that says, although you might be receiving this outside of your work hours, right? Like there was no expectation to respond until your work hours, whatever those might be. And that seems so simple, but I feel like that in itself gives people permission, right? So even if I might read it, if it's 11 p.m. my time, I'm like, okay, right? Like it's nothing's on fire. Like it can wait till tomorrow. But I think those small nuances, the more we can embed things like that into company cultures, the easier it is for people to understand what's expected.
Yeah, and like extending on that, here in Australia, they've just passed a law that businesses can't expect their employees to be contacted outside of hours. I'm not sure how it's going to be implemented properly, but there's actually a law on that exact topic. Just expanding on this a little bit, then we talked about employees and we've spoken a bit about the leaders, but I'm just wondering, curious on, how can leaders really foster that culture and that environment that really values the digital wellness? What else is there that leaders can actually do?
I think another thing leaders can do is just to be really present and accessible. Like there's some great data that one of the number one ways that leaders build trust is by being present and accessible. And that doesn't mean they have to be available 24/7, but when they, read all of the email and respond to all of the points rather than 3 out of the 4, for example, or when they're accessible, when people really need help or need guidance in a decision. I think that presence and accessibility with digital help and without it go a really long way. I think when leaders use digital to be available to people, so hey, let me open my calendar so we can get together for lunch or coffee, or hey, let's have a wormhole open, during the day when we're working together. That accessibility through digital is a big deal. And I think when leaders are transparent about how they're setting their own boundaries, that's a big deal. I used to work with a leader, and he every day he wore a sport coat over his like polo shirt or button down shirt or whatever. And every day he'd come in, he'd put his coat on the back of his chair, and then when he left, he'd take his coat and go home. And so you always knew if he was there or not by whether his coat was on his chair. And then he started to want to go to like soccer games for his grandkids, and he would take an extra coat along so that people thought he was in the office. So he could like leave and wear a coat, but still have his coat on the back of his chair. And it was just so sad because the alternative would have been, he could have been transparent about, hey, I'm going to my grandson's soccer game and I'll be back in an hour. And, everybody knew he was working hard. There were no questions about performance or accessibility or anything. But that kind of transparency would have given others permission as well. So it's just a story that has stuck with me over time. And I think it's really, the takeaway message is really about leaders modeling the way. Like a lot of times leaders take on lots of responsibility because they want to protect their team. So the leaders will work over the weekend so their team doesn't need to. The leaders will work late so the team doesn't need to. And actually what you're doing then is modeling those choices of taking on more than you actually have time for. So sometimes we need to, sometimes we're in a crunch, right? Sometimes we need to go above and beyond. But in general, when leaders can set the tone and demonstrate through their own transparency and through their own choices, that opportunity to turn off and get away, I think that goes a long way.
Sorry, go ahead, Rob.
No, you're right. I was going to say thanks, Tracy, so you can go.
I think that's the critical piece, right? Being transparent with your teams, but also knowing kind of the line of transparency, right? Because sometimes it gets a little bit blurred and you still want this kind of protective cover of your team sometimes, right? To A, keep them engaged, and B, kind of shield them from maybe the chaos that's happening above you. But I think something else in addition to those pieces is like sharing what works for you as a leader, right? Like something as simple as like, how do you organize your Outlook? Because there's too many emails that are coming all day, every day, right? Or how are you blocking your calendar? Or what tools do you use, right? Like things that we probably would take for granted and say, nobody cares how I organize my Outlook or my files, but maybe they do, right? Like no one teaches you that stuff. And so even simplistic things in the sense of, this couldn't really impact anyone. Like it might, right? Having that actual conversation with your team and asking your team, right? What do you need? How can I help support you when it comes to the overload that we are in the digital space, right? Or using our technology in our organization, or just managing the day to day, right? I think it's having the transparent lines of communication, really listening and asking your team, like, and listening to what they have to say. Sometimes you might not be able to change it, but sometimes you can. And then just sharing best practices, right? What works for you, or what, have you seen work for other people? And then kind of creating that sharing culture within a team can really help shift, because then maybe I have a new idea that's working well for me, right? And it just kind of helps create a microculture. And back to Tracy, your point around the team, right? The team norms and kind of what the conversation is being driven, and how can we use things to our advantage in this digital space versus taking away from the chaos.
Thanks, Ashley. One thing you said, Tracy, too, I just wanted to jump back to, was around the code example and the grandfather. And I just wonder if the digital version of that is, people keeping their Teams on so they look like they're online, or their Skypes on so that they look like they're working, but maybe they're not. Do you see that as something that happens? Is that?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Because our digital presence, right, is so palpable today. And yeah. There's so many ways that we can, like, of course, we want to be smart and we want to send the right messages and we want to be professional. But also, I think when we have more of that ability to be real about how and I love your point, Ashley, like demonstrating what's working for us and what we've tried. And there isn't one size fits all, but hey, here's what's worked for me. And, maybe others can learn from it, and let me ask questions and understand what I can learn as well. And that ability to kind of be more transparent in the digital space to the extent that that's appropriate and it's not TMI and it's not unprofessional. So I think so much of our conversation is kind of about the balance, right? Like digital can be really great to connect us, but let's not let it overwhelm our connections in the first place. Or, hey, we can be on and demonstrate our presence as long as we're not kind of gaming the system and over, losing transparency. So I think that balance piece is a really great point, Rod.
So
I think there is even just a personal comment. There's even a very beautiful function in Outlook that allows you to time your emails. So you don't have to physically be in front of your computer. If you want to send an email in the middle of the night, you just set a time, you go sleep, and then the email comes out at 11:56 p.m. and everybody's like, oh wow, he's still working, she's still working. I mean, this has been the part of the working culture since ever, right? I remember when the most advanced technology was a typing machine, typewriter. There was a colleague of my father who pretended to be busy by just putting a piece of paper into a typewriting machine and just pressing random keys, and people could hear that
Right.
the machine was typing.
Yes.
So yeah, it's just it's the human nature is the same. It's just the taking different shapes and the different expressions as the technology is evolving.
Thank you.
Yeah, I heard a great story about a woman who she was in like a finance role and she used Excel all the time, but she didn't have enough to do and her job wasn't engaging her. And so she wrote a book, but she wrote it all in Excel. So then if somebody peeked at her screen, she was still in Excel and she was in a cell and she was, clearly doing the work that she needed to do. So it's interesting to think about like how those norms shift over time. The technology may change, but human nature can be what it is. And your example of like scheduling emails, I think that can also be used in a really good way. Like Ashley, I love the point you were making about, hey, you may have received this outside of business hours, but I'm not expecting you to respond outside of business hours. Love that. And I know people who will, like I want to get it off of my plate and it's 9 o'clock at night, but I don't want it to hit your email box until working hours tomorrow. So that's another nice way to use that scheduling function that is, like really about respecting people's calendars and respecting their boundaries and realizing that I may have different work hour preferences as opposed to you, and I can be empathetic to, what your challenges are and how we draw those boundaries for ourselves. So it's interesting to think about how we can use those tools, and it's such a great point that that's available.
I think the way I used it the most was actually to prevent the overload, not to pretend I'm working, but it was there was a conversation about an issue, and I just had to put a piece of a puzzle together and send it to someone, and I knew it would trigger a reaction, and I didn't have the space or time to process it that day, so I scheduled the email for, let's say, middle of the night, so I knew it would reach the person when he or she was already at home and was not at work, and they could only read it the next day, and that gave me some space to be able to do other things and then come back to that issue.
All right, so I might move us on. We've actually only got 10 minutes left. God, it's gone quick. We've spoken about employees. We've spoken about leaders. This is a hacking HR conversation. So what about HR? So with the rise of the remote work, like what role does HR play in this managing digital overload? What are some ideas for HR professionals?
I think HR professionals can really bring best practices and how we think about culture, right? Like what are the ways that we embed, nurture, catalyze culture, from clear mission and direction to opportunities for involvement to clear policies and practices and swim lanes and ways that we deal with conflict to ways that we learn and develop our skills. All of those are aspects of really great cultures. Lots of differences between culture, but those are some things that work for the benefit of culture, no matter what kind of organization it is. So I think HR can be purveyors of culture and best practices toward culture. I think HR can also really set the bar and really look at systems that emphasize performance management, right? Like the best leadership, the best ways that we manage have always been about objectives and outcomes rather than just presence in the whites of people's eyes. Like, what are people getting done? What are the results they're driving? What are the ways that they're interacting with others? What's their effectiveness in terms of not just the task, but the relationship? So when we have systems, HR systems within organizations that help us do that, that's a really big deal. When we have HR systems that help us to develop leaders so they can do this modeling behavior. When we have HR systems that really use technology and digital in order to hold us accountable to what's important to us. So like I think about, systems that are tracking, who we're hiring, who we're interviewing, who's being promoted, so that we can look at patterns that relate to DE&I. Those are a big deal, and technology can help with those kinds of things. HR that is really helping to think about how teams bond and what those processes are, and the technology, like working closely with IT so that the technology can help teams bond together. All of those are really good ideas. And then HR has access to, like we're thinking about whole people and well-being cognitively, physically, emotionally. And there are so many apps today that can help with that, right? Like whether they're well-being apps, or whether they're access to EAP programs, or whether they're access to meditation apps, or, counseling apps, those kinds of things. There's so many things today. So HR can be cutting edge in terms of thinking about what are our goals and our visions as a culture? What are our goals and visions and objectives as an organization from the standpoint of the business? And then being a business partner to ensure that the digital and the social are braided in a way that really helps us create systems for learning and well-being and all of those kinds of good things. So it seems like HR is in such an important place right now. Like all paths lead back to HR today in a good way.
I think HR has always been very important, and more so in the overall digital transformation of every organization, because if you think about it, actually the way HR digitalizes their activities and the tools they're using and the way they are actually integrated and working pretty much define the employee experience nowadays. And employee experience is a very important point in the overall employee value proposition.
I echo both of those sentiments. And I think HR can be a pivotal driver in how we conduct kind of assessments of digital accessibility in the workplace, and partnering with the various teams, right? Technology teams, digital teams, whatever it might be, to really identify and drive things forward to help eliminate any barriers that might be there for employees that have disabilities. I think that's huge. And then the second piece is being able to really understand the tech, and not just from employee value prop culture, right? Like driving the bigger thing strategically. But we all know to get anything done, you need business buy-in, right? You need stakeholder buy-in. And so how can you really entrench yourself as an HR professional in where your organization is going from a digital footprint perspective, and then tie those things together so that when you do come to the table and you want to raise whatever it is project that you're working on, right? You can marry the two and get that buy-in a little bit easier.
No, that's great. So we had some really good points. So policy development, wellness, training, support, some really good strategies that HR can take away. So we're down to about 5 minutes to go. So if we just want to go around the room and just, if each panelist want to just summarize what are the most critical insights from them from the discussion, and their last sort of their thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, I can start. I think one of the takeaways for me from the discussion is it's all about balance, right? Like we don't want to vilify digital or social media or whatever, but we want to be really mindful and intentional about how we manage it. That's one. So kind of that idea that it's all about balance. I think another is to just be reflective of our roles with others and our roles with our communities so that we can manage ourselves and be present, be more present with each other. And then a third thing I think is that we have shared responsibility and accountability, right? Like we have accountability for ourselves and the choices that we make. We have influence over others, no matter what role we're in. We're influencing other people. If we're in leadership roles and as HR professionals, we can create the conditions where digital overload doesn't become such a problem. And so I think it's this shared responsibility and accountability between HR, leadership, organizations, business, individuals, right? And when we share that responsibility, I think we can be that much more intentional and that much more planful about where we're going and the kinds of policies, practices, and social norms that will help us get there.
Thanks, Tracy.
So I would just say two quick things. I think it's one, understanding what's going to work for you, right? Trying out some of these things as a leader, as an employee, as an HR professional. And I think really thinking through what can work for you and is there a way you can implement some of these practices with quicker buy-in, right, in your organization. And number one. And then number two, knowing that there's no right way, right? And it might be trial and error. And you need to sometimes cut yourself some slack because I think oftentimes we want to just do everything yesterday. And it takes some time to shift culture and shift the way organizations have operated and to even integrate some of this the new way of digital, right? Even if we think about the intergenerations that are in the workplace. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley.
I want to say that from my perspective, it's very important to stay on top of the things when it comes to all this digital technology because everything is evolving so fast. And if you imagine the time between the invention of photography and actually developing and bringing the commercially viable camera on the market was about 100 years, right? And nowadays everything is maybe in not even in decades, it's in years, sometimes in months, and some of the technology is very short-lived. It's very easy to get lost and lose track, and we have to develop mechanisms how to actually grasp the new technology and stay ahead of the development and make sure we use it for the better.
Thank you. So thanks for a wonderful discussion. And we've talked about the digital overload from the point of view of the employee, the leader, the HR. And I think that those closing points were on point. It's definitely all about balance. I like the thing that Ashley said around, there's no one right way. Sometimes I use a statement just saying it all depends as an answer, like that all depends on the circumstances, the conditions or the context of what you're in. So that's quite, really quite a valid thing. It's a shared responsibility of the employee, of the leaders, of HR, really to make that right environment and that right culture. And another great point was about, just work out what works from all those different perspectives. And and stay top of technology. It's pretty difficult. It is moving so fast. But it's quite exciting, and it'll just keep changing and improving. But it is a balance. So I think that's the end of today's conversation from Hacking HR, and thank you again, everybody. So thank you.
Thank
Speak
you.
to you in the next conversation.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.